Welcome back to the channel, everyone. In this week's episode of Retro Movie Review Theater. This week, we're going to revisit another Terry Gilliam project, one that he directed and wrote with Monty Python cohort Michael Palin, 1981 sci-fi fantasy, Time Bandits. There's an additional reason why I wanted to look at this film, other than it being a movie that, as an 80s D&D nerd, holds a special place in my nerd heart. That reason is Apple Studios. That's right. Apple Studios has bought the rights to this film as an intellectual property, and it will premiere this week on Apple TV as a limited series, rebooted and remade. And if you think it has been well received by fans, you would be wrong. The trailer for that series has been getting mocked online, including the inclusion of comedic quirkiness being added by director-producer Taika Waititi, the man who brought you Thor: Love and Thunder, and lead actress Lisa Kudrow. That's right, Phoebe from Friends. So basically, we've gone from an Oscar-nominated director and writer with Terry Gilliam to Taika Waititi and Lisa Kudrow. Okie dokie, I'm sure everything is gonna be fine. And if you think this is all about toxic fandom, if you think I'm being toxic on my own, think about this. Terry Gilliam was brought to the set for a 2 to 3 week visit with Taika Waititi and a preview of the Time Bandits television show production. Gilliam was so discouraged and upset with what he saw and how his vision was being handled that he walked out and left after only 3 days. But, as usual, I'm going to reserve judgment. I will be reviewing the show when it premieres, incidentally the same day as Deadpool and Wolverine, which tells me that even Apple doesn't think it's very good when its release schedule has been buried under that marketing juggernaut. But I digress. Let's get back to 1981's Time Bandits, a film that could be called a quasi-Monty Python film because almost every member of that comedy troupe has a role in the film or a hand in the production, including Gilliam, Palin, and John Cleese. It has an ensemble cast as the film is primarily centered around time travel, sometimes into fantastic worlds that cross over with actual history, and that cast includes Katherine Helmond, Sean Connery, Ian Holm, and the recently deceased Shelly Duvall, who stated that this film was the opposite of The Shining. This film was so much fun to work on. With that in mind, you have to realize Time Bandits is a film that has the typical absurdity of a Monty Python skit, the mocking of modern British life, a mocking of the traditional conservative culture, and a demand in the suspension of disbelief in order to get you into the first act, which just takes off in a fantasy adventure in a split second, turning a seemingly sarcastic comedic look at the life of a neglected and trapped child into the world of dimensional hopping dwarves who have stolen from the Supreme Being a map on a quest to rob history's largest figures of their wealth. Now, this group of dwarves is led by the legendary Kenny Baker. That's right, R2-D2 himself. But do not expect to see these characters resurrected in a TV series. For some reason, giving acting jobs to people who are extremely short is frowned upon in Hollywood now. But again, I digress. The dwarves in Time Bandits have been demoted on multiple occasions by the Supreme Being because they made certain mistakes. In retaliation, these dwarves steal this map from basically God, which tells them where and when specific doorways to other times and places will open up, allowing them easy access to loot and the ability to escape without harm. In an effort to elude the Supreme Being, or God, the Time Bandits use a doorway that actually opens up inside Kevin's, our 11-year-old protagonist, by the way, inside Kevin's wardrobe. And Kevin is then caught up in the escape as the dwarves run from the Supreme Being, who wants his map back, and they use a doorway that drops them into Napoleon 1789's Italy. Now, therefore, Kevin is stuck with the Time Bandits. At first, everything seems like it's working out right. Our bandits encounter Napoleon at the Battle of Castiglione, and Napoleon seems way too occupied with puppet shows instead of prosecuting his war. Napoleon is magnificently played by Ian Holm, and yes, this is an over-the-top film. Do not expect historical accuracy, just historical lunacy. Our Time Bandits will travel to ancient Greece to meet King Agamemnon, played by Connery, Sherwood Forest to meet Robin Hood, played by John Cleese, who teaches them a begrudging lesson in charity. They end up on a sinking ship, which happens to be the Titanic, followed by another ship that is crewed by an ogre and his wife, only to run into a giant who is wearing that ship as a hat as he walks through the ocean. And yes, before I forget, there is an evil arch-villain in all of this, manipulating everything from behind the scenes. He is the personification of evil and played brilliantly by David Warner, who gives just a great performance, and one where you can tell he, like everyone else in this film, is just having a blast. The production, the costumes, the set designs, the effects for 1981 are just top notch, even if the story itself sometimes drags too long to get to the punchline, and the synthesizer music that sometimes accompanies chase scenes can be a little outdated. But again, if you're a Gen X nerd, this film is beloved and these flaws are barely recognizable. If you are not a Gen X nerd, then know this: what you are seeing is a true cult classic. That term, cult classic, is thrown around a lot, and let's face it, sometimes a movie gains popularity with general audiences well after its release. That's not a cult classic, that's a late bloomer. A cult classic is just that: something that has a smaller following, a dedication, a population that will defend it under all assault. It is not something that is seen as universally accepted as the years go by. That is not a cult classic, that is a late bloomer. No, you either love this film or you just don't get it and it makes no sense to you. I, for one, love it. Ever since it was on heavy rotation on cable back in 1982, ever since I went to the theaters to see it when it was released in 1981, it was initially a box office hit on a budget of $5 million. It grossed over $42 million worldwide. But a sequel never came, even though we all waited for one. Gilliam parlayed his success with Time Bandits into getting other projects done that he had a passion for, like his film Brazil. And not many of his new films made money, so Time Bandits 2 was eternally stuck on a shelf. And although the nerd culture pined for a sequel that we never got, we still have and love 1981 sci-fi hit, even though some of the effects are so primitive compared to today. But the acting, the set designs, it's the joy in which the film is produced with. That joy shines through on the screen, it shines through on the faces of the actors, and it shines through in the level of detail in which the artist created those sets, the artist created those costumes, and put everything together so well. And yes, Time Bandits is typical of an early 80s fantasy film like The Dark Crystal, The Never-Ending Story, or The Secret of Nim. Time Bandits is all about immersion and letting go of that which anchors us in reality. It is sometimes sarcastic, it is sometimes ironic, sometimes it's a dark look at the adventures of a young boy caught up in the conflict between good and evil, of light and dark, and one where the absence of the authority figures back home is liberating instead of endangering. Time Bandits is truly a film that is not for everyone. This is a nerd's film. And I don't mean the new age nerds, where everyone who's seen a couple of Marvel films now thinks they have nerd credit. No, Time Bandits requires your full geek attention and acceptance, and it remains a film that inspired a whole generation of fantasy nuts that found our identity through art such as this pop culture piece that was made for us and no one else. So if you truly are a nerd, if you truly are a geek, if you want to see just how far your fantasy love goes, check out 1981's box office hit and true cult classic of an era gone by, Terry Gilliam's Time Bandits. And do it before Apple TV shows you something different and you won't be able to see the original the same ever again. And that's what I think. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Have you seen Time Bandits? Is it a favorite of yours? And do you plan on checking out Apple TV's Remake series? I thank you for watching, and if you want more pop culture fun, check out more of my retro movie reviews and general movie reviews by clicking on the thumbnails at the end of this video. And don't forget to like and subscribe, it really helps out the channel. As always, I'm still your reluctant gringo and from south of the border. Salud and a huevo.